Hello, this is Franco Cabral, broadcasting from the Honest Liar podcast, a conversation around finding the inner liar within all of us and leveraging the truth to create expansion across all areas of your life. Today's topic is this: I am afraid. Yesterday, I was in my boxing session, which is something I do pretty much 6 days a week. Been training super intensely for a boxing amateur fight, which was one of my targets for this year that I decided to do in the beginning of the year. As I was doing mitt work with my coach and trainer, we do one-on-one training, I flinched when he went to go throw a punch at me, and I actually closed my eyes. And I was pretty frustrated because he noticed a few times that I was closing my eyes and I was afraid of the punches that were coming to me. And in the moment, I wasn't really realizing how much less I was doing that than I used to when I started. It happened maybe twice or three times throughout the whole training session yesterday, but it used to happen all the time, anytime a punch was coming to me. And what I started to reflect back was, why did I decide to do this boxing match in the first place? Well, the beginning of the year, I realized that this was something that scared the shit out of me because I had a story that I'm not a fighter. And that came from a bigger pain when I started to think about my kids and the leader that I wanted to be for my kids. And I felt this void as a leader because I was afraid that I couldn't protect my children if something happened to them, because I had this story, again, that I was not a fighter. So I started to really dissect that in the beginning of the year when I did my fact map and goal setting for the year. And I realized that that was my biggest fear as it relates to my body, is not being able to protect myself and my family. So I decided to set a target this year where I was going to go from no training ever, martial arts, nothing, except for maybe when I was a kid, but nothing that I really retained. It was only a very short period of time. To I was going to train to fight a USA amateur boxing sanctioned fight before the end of the year. I hadn't even decided on a gym or anything. But what I was certain was that the fear that I felt, which literally crippled me from even wanting to sign up at a boxing studio, was going to lead to me becoming a much better man and leader, and the certainty to lead my children and all the other areas of my life. What I realized was about 2 years ago, though, when I started really being honest with myself, as I've communicated to you guys, and if you haven't listened to my Origins podcast, please go back and listen to it, is that my greatest fear is my greatest opportunity. And fear slowly became a weapon for me. So I started to identify all of the things that I was afraid of 2 years ago. Some of them were very general, but very deeply rooted inside of me. I was deathly afraid of being a shitty father. I started a new business, April 2016, and I was very afraid of failing. My whole life, I've always had a fear of not being good enough. To the point that to overcome that fear and those stories, I even tattooed on my chest, "I am that I am enough," as a daily reminder of who I am. As I reflected and started to tackle some of these fears, I realized that the deeper the fear and the more the fear was embedded inside me, the deeper the story. That means that I had a lot of reps on telling myself that story. So it would require massive action to overcome that story. And the not feeling good enough, as an example, is a deeply rooted story. And one of the things that I did, that I talked about in the gratitude message a few podcasts ago, was that I committed to recording 50 audios of why I love myself and why I'm enough. And every single time I chose to lean in, I was doing one more rep on why I'm good enough and why I should love myself. So boxing, I didn't know at the time, is something that requires a significant amount of reps. Another fear that I had was last year is that I couldn't swim, and I could swim just a little bit, pool swimming, nothing too crazy. So I decided to sign up for an Ironman because the swim scared the shit out of me. And the power that I got by overcoming that fear, and it wasn't easy. For 7 months, I trained 3 to 4 times a week in the pool, and I used to have panic attacks in the pool. And I know that doesn't really make sense because in the pool, how could you drown if it's a 4.5-foot pool and I'm 5'8" on a good day? I was having panic attacks, and the mind is such a powerful thing because what was happening was that as I was swimming, I hadn't completed my workout yet, and I was starting to get gassed certain times, especially in the beginning. And my mind would go to a place where I've only done 500 meters and I'm getting tired, and my swim is supposed to be 2,000 meters when I do the race. I'm going to drown. There's no way that I'm going to finish this. And I had a lot of practice in the pool of bringing my mind back to the present moment versus the future fear that hadn't happened yet. Because in that moment was when I had the opportunity to actually start the process of overcoming the fear. The process of Ironman, what I learned was that every rep and every choice that I made to take one swim in the pool was one rep in overcoming the fear that I had. My mind can't play tricks on me when my body has done the reps to overcome that fear, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Because when that fear kicks in at a later date, my mind has memory to go back to where I've overcome that fear this time and that time and on this day. And my mind, then I can actually combat my fear with the memories of the actions that I've actually taken. So on the day of Ironman last year in 2017, I still had a moment in the pool or in the lake where I panicked. I freaked. And I was only about 20% into my 1.2 mile swim, and I was gasping. My heart rate was elevated. I started to freak out. I knew mentally that I couldn't have been gassed because I trained for 7 months for this, and I've done a 1.2 mile swim before, but I was completely in my head. And it was the voice of one of the volunteers that saw me swimming and said, "You're a great swimmer. You're in your head. Remember why you started." And it was such a divine moment that I had. And in that instant, I felt like God was communicating to me. And I got the reminder of overcoming the fear and becoming the man that I wanted to be for my family. And my body just kicked in. And I remembered all of the reps that I had in the pool. And I didn't stop, not one more time during that swim. And I ended up crushing my swim. So I applied this same concept to boxing and many other areas of my life, like even this podcast. This podcast is something that scared the shit out of me. Still to this day, it scares me sometimes to turn on the mic, and I'm afraid of what people are going to think. You know, whether it's going to have impact, whether there's actual meaning to it, and whether it's going to accomplish what I want, and whether it's going to be good enough, and many other fears. But I realized that every rep that I choose to do a podcast, every time I choose to publish it and put it out there, is one more rep that makes it easier for me to overcome in my mind when that fear starts to kick in. I can go back and say, no, this is episode number 8. I've already done this 7 times. What's there to be afraid of? And coming back to boxing, it's the same thing. I have done rep over rep over rep for 8 months, training about 5 times a week with my coach. I've been hit. I've done sparring. I haven't had my fight yet, so I haven't had that experience yet. But when I have my fight, I can lean on all the muscle memory and all the actions that I've taken over the last 8 to 9 months. Recording this podcast and actually talking about my fight was another step in the direction of me accomplishing this fight. I identified that when I broadcast and I publish what I'm going to do, then you can't take it back. It's out there. So now I then become the guy who didn't do what he said he was going to do. So that's actually why I'm recording this podcast. is talking about the fear that I have around boxing. And once I put this out there, I have committed to you guys, and I've already committed to myself, that I am going to do a USA amateur boxing fight. My trainer said that I'm ready. I'm going to be scheduling my first fight within the next month. And I will obviously be talking about that as I'm leading up to it and definitely after. And I want you to know that it's not because I have all the confidence in the world that I can crush this fight yet, but I will, because I will continue to stay committed to the actions that will get me there. But the fight still scares the shit out of me. Getting in the ring still scares me. And the only way that I will find out, which I know I will, that I am good enough to go toe-to-toe and that the work that I have put in will make me proud when I'm done, is by doing it. So this message sharing today, and the lesson that I've learned is that fear is a weapon. Fear is the best weapon that I have. Every time I'm afraid of something, on the other side of that fear is massive expansion. The greater the fear, the greater the expansion that I'm going to have. So my ask for you guys today is to take a moment and write down all of your biggest fears. And then start by taking on one of those. Whatever it is, take on one. And before you're done with the exercise, take one action towards that fear. So as an example, for me, it was boxing. And when I identified that this was my fear, the very first thing that I did was I went to sign up for an introductory class at a boxing studio. And when I was there, I committed and signed for a 100-session package and paid up front, because of the fact that I know that when I leverage myself by making a financial commitment and I commit to some sort of an event, then there's no taking it back. Then it goes from me being afraid to then being a quitter. And that triggers me significantly more than the fear of getting in the ring, is the idea of quitting on something that I've committed to financially and also energetically. And it's the same thing by publishing and talking about it. So talk to your loved ones or somebody and just put it out there into the universe. I will be overcoming this fear, whatever it is that you identified for yourself. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this message. As always, I ask that if you get value from this podcast or anything that you follow me on social media, at Man in the Mirror on Facebook, it's Franco Cabral on IG, share it. Share this message with somebody else that you think this will connect with. And if you love this podcast, getting value, rate and review this podcast. It helps tremendously with spreading the light that I desire to spread. So thank you so much for listening to the Honest Liar podcast. Again, a conversation around finding the inner liar within all of us and leveraging the truth to create expansion across all areas of your life.